Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's the strangest or creepiest thing that has happened to you or your family? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I went thrifting while killing time in Nashville and found a man's vintage fur-lined leather ranch jacket and tried it on. In the right front pocket was my sister's old retainer she had lost when in grade school, almost 30 years before. It had her full name and our landline phone number pressed into the plastic molded part. My family never visited Nashville, as far as I know. We grew up hours away, still creeping out. When I was a kid, one night I was staying at my grandma's house and some strange guy came to the window and knocked on it. I told my grandma, but she didn't believe me. The next day, this guy who had murdered his wife was found right down the street. It was the guy who knocked on our window the night before. Very creepy. Still remember it. My wife and I were nearly married and renting a near 100-year-old house. One night, we were right in the middle of making love when suddenly it sounded like someone walking through the house, dragging heavy boots through the hard floor slowly. I jumped up, stark naked, and grabbed my gun and screamed, "Who's there?" multiple times as the sound persisted. I flung the door open and nothing was there. The house was so small I could see everything from the bedroom door. There was nothing that could have possibly made that noise in sight. My wife and I both climbed back into bed and laid awake wondering who or what it could have been. For me, it was a man crouched down in the dark in the bathroom I had to pass before reaching my bedroom at night when everyone else in the house was asleep and I was on my way to bed. He put a finger to his mouth in the shh motion, and the next thing I know, I'm in my bed watching through my open door for what seemed like forever until I saw him make a dash down the stairs. Nothing was stolen. Nobody was hurt. My dad came home to the front door wide open, and a window behind where I had been watching TV alone that night was open. The screen had been taken off and was on the ground outside. I was very young, second or third grade at the time. He was wearing goggles. He later realized that they were probably night vision goggles. There was no explanation for what he was doing in the house, and the police didn't take it seriously or pursue any sort of investigation. They thought I was making things up. The pole barn burned down and no one knows what happened. On July 1st, 2016, my almost 19-year-old son went in the pole barn to get the tractor. He started it, backed out, and went out to the bunk silo. When he looked back at the pole barn, it was completely ablaze in less than 2 minutes. This was a 75 by 60 foot building. It was full of farm machinery. No one else was on the farm that day. The fire inspector couldn't find a reason for the fire. The electric breakers were turned off, so it wasn't an electrical fire. My family lost over $300,000 worth of farm equipment, including the tractor my grandpa bought brand new in 1976. The time I got swarmed with flies in the kitchen of a house we already believed was haunted. They came from nowhere, buzzed around for 15 minutes, and flew out of the room, never to be seen again. I killed hundreds of them and left them in the kitchen sink for when my wife came home as a sanity check that I hadn't lost my mind. She saw the dead flies and believed me. It was winter, no garbage nearby, windows were closed. I have no clue where they came from or why, or where the survivors I didn't manage to kill went to. I was driving my VW Bug on I-35 in Austin in the late 80s. It was raining and my Bug was basically a tin can with wheels. There was an 18-wheeler driving next to me on the driver's side. I got a weird feeling watching the tires of that rig thrown off rain, so I slowed down, and when my speed got to around 25 or 30, I watched that rig fishtail and fall over on its side right where my car would have been. It was the late 60s. We lived in the country, nothing but farms. My dad worked as a truck driver and his truck was parked out front, loaded, ready for him to depart the next morning. All of a sudden, we heard a big commotion and lost power. A car had run off the road, hit a power pole, and flipped several times, ultimately landing against his truck. I think every emergency vehicle in the county responded. As kids, we were told to stay inside, but we were glued to the windows. As the rescue crews provided aid, something caught my eye. It was a shadow, just a shadow moving away from the wreckage, walking down the side of the house to the field behind us. I followed the shadow from window to window in the house, until it finally disappeared into the field. I told my parents, they just shrugged and went on. The next morning I learned that the driver was killed on impact. This happened just 3 weeks ago, and it's still haunting me. We had 2 dogs, Hammy and Monty. My mom let them out, like she's done for the last 12 years. We have an open yard next to the woods, and we've had dogs for 25 years here without any issues, until now. It was 6 a.m. when both dogs went outside. Hammy came back quickly, but Monty didn't. It only took my mom about 15 to 30 seconds to grab a treat for Hammy, but when she turned around, she heard the most horrifying scream. I woke up to the sound, but by the time I got outside, Monty was already gone. I ran into the woods, following a blood trail that only lasted about 10 feet. After hours, then days of searching, there was no more sign of the dog. No blood, no trace, nothing, just gone. What freaked me out the most is that for the last 2 weeks, we've been hearing these awful, gut-wrenching screams coming from the woods. Screams that sound like something is fighting for its life, only to suddenly go silent. The strangest part is that we've never heard anything like this before. These screams are unlike anything we've experienced in all our years living here. And yes, we reported it to animal control and the local police, but the response from the animal control, let's just say it wasn't helpful or reassuring. Whatever took our dog is still out there, and it's still terrifying. I really miss my dog. My grandfather died on January 18, 1986. On January 18, 1988, my first niece was born, 2 years to the day. When she was a baby, I was in high school, so I took care of her a lot. She would always cry all the time and scream, "The man, the man." It was so creepy. Eventually, it stopped scaring her, and she would sit and talk to random comers for hours about everything and anything. "Man, do you want tea? I make you tea," etc. When she was like almost 5, I had her at my grandmother's house showing her my grandma's photo album. There was a picture of my grandma and grandpa in it. She said, "Aunt, me, there's the man. He is my papa, and he loves me so much." Let's just say it was days before I slept again. It would not have been so weird if she was not born on the same day he died, and not the first great-grandchild. Shaking my head, it's just so creepy. I still get chills. She stopped seeing him when she was about 7. She does not even remember him now. When my parents brought me home from the hospital after I was born, my mom insisted on having me sleep in the bassinet next to my parents' bed. My dad wanted me to sleep in my new room on the other side of the bathroom that separated the 2 bedrooms. My mom refused. Why? For 3 nights she saw a shadow person in the bedroom doorway as my dad and I slept there unaware. Each time the figure told her to take me and leave. On the 4th night, a pipe burst in the bathroom from being struck by lightning. It was the wall shared with my bedroom, right above my crib. If I had been in my room, I would have been killed. I never knew growing up what my dad would get so upset when I used the bathroom or shower during a storm. There are more weird stories from that house. My mom later told me that it was regularly used for seances, which I would have liked to have known decades earlier. I mean, the chances of it are pretty, astronomical, but I mean, same state, could happen. Still really awesome, and the connection to family is always special, so cool. I currently live in a small town in southeast Georgia, hundreds of miles from where I grew up. At a public dock or riverfront area, sitting within my wife in a swing, an older gentleman walking nearby hears me mention the small town where I grew up in conversation with my wife while talking about going home for Christmas. Says he used to stay at a motel there semi-frequently when he was traveling for work back in the early 60s. Not unheard of, and my hometown was a crossroads of sorts between 2 major highway interchanges. But as we talked further, and I asked where exactly he stayed, he described a since-demolished motel and how my 2 girls playing nearby on the playground reminded him of 3 girls that were frequently running around the front desk and outside the motel when he was there. My grandparents owned that motel, and my mother and her 2 sisters spent their days playing around the office and front desk of the motel while my grandmother was working. Totally weirded me out for a bit. It was after my great-grandmother died. She lived with my grandparents until she died. When many of us would visit, we could hear her sitting in her rocking chair in the corner of our eyes. It happened to me every time I'd go over there. I spent the night there one time and had a messed up dream. It started in this very bright hallway. I walked to the end and found a door slightly opened. My great-grandmother was in there. She was sitting in her rocking chair. She looked very peaceful. All of a sudden, her body started decaying, and she was screaming, "God isn't real," over and over. I spiraled and came to my bed paralyzed, and I saw this massive shadow on the wall creeping toward me. I snapped out of it eventually and was completely effed up for a few months over it. I lost my mom very unexpectedly this time last year. She was my best friend, extremely close. It was and still is devastating. In 2012, she got me and my sibling custom snow globes for Christmas. Each one had a personal mommy thing engraved on them, and each had something different on the inside. Mine was a mommy penguin and 2 babies. It's one of my favorite gifts she ever gave, and every year I display it. She passed the day after I had just decorated her house for Christmas and set out those globes. I set them out and didn't touch them again. Nobody did. Nobody wound them up and hadn't in over a year. About 2 weeks after she passed, we had just gotten home from her memorial, and I was very sad. I'm walking to the back room and suddenly I hear the snow globe music. My boyfriend witnessed it and was shocked. Nobody walked near it or the wall it was near. We tried recreating all types of ways we could have somehow caused it to start and was never able to. I 100% believe that was my mom letting me know she was okay and she loved me. There's been a few instances since she passed that have made me question our whole reality and existence. I now fully believe there is much more to this life than we know. I'll preface this by saying I can't have my brother in my life right now, and he was probably on drugs when this happened. When I was a kid, I grew up in a Pentecostal household. One time my family went to this work retreat camping trip in the woods in Georgia. Some backstory. My dad's boss had a kid around my age, and we were playing together. She told me to follow this black cat to a lake. Sure, why not? When we got there, her mom, my dad's boss's wife, is waiting. There are candles in a circle with some weird stuff in it, like a little wooden figure with hair and a baby tooth. She tells me to sit in the circle. I'm like, nah, don't think I'm supposed to. But then she says, get in right now or something bad will happen to you. So I get in. Her kid's also sitting in a circle. The mom starts talking and doing some ritual stuff, and I don't really remember now. That's when my mom, who, by the way, is absolutely crazy, comes charging out of the woods like a maniac. She snatches me out of the circle and then jumps on my dad's boss's wife, like straight up tackles her. She's pulling her hair, yelling, calling her a witch, the whole 9 yards. The fight gets broken up, and later my dad throws my mom across the room for beating up my boss's wife. Yeah, weird times. Anyway, that's not even the main story. Fast forward. I've had a rough life. If something bad could happen, it usually did. My brother calls me one day, totally freaking out. He says he gave a homeless man a beer, and the guy grabs his arm, looks him dead in the eyes, and asks, "Do you have a sister?" Then the man tells him his sister, me, is cursed because of an incomplete witch ritual. Says I'm doomed to live a sad life unless I find a way to break the curse. Oh, and the other girl from the ritual, she's destined to die from it. Here's the thing. The other girl did die. She overdosed a couple months later. My brother was hyperventilating on the phone, losing his mind. I don't know if any of it is true. I seriously doubt it. The scariest thing in our lives was probably our mothers. 2 sides of the same coin, destined to do their best to ruin us both. Still, the whole thing gave me the creeps at the time. My brother was spooked. I have the opposite of creepy, unexplained thing, but somehow still weird. I was born in a house that was at least 500 years old, but likely more. Very old village in the UK. The house was in the center of our village, and in the center of the house was an old well, courtyard design. The village itself was in records from about 1000 AD, Doomsday Book. So my mom's theory was that well was at least 1,000 years old, and the house had been built around it. So here we have my mother, an Australian in a strange new country, on maternity leave, home alone with a newborn baby all day, every day, while my dad was at work. What did she do? Well, every couple of days, she used to put me down for a nap, go down into the very dark cellar completely alone, and start tapping on the walls looking for secret rooms. She never found anything and never saw anything scary. But ever since she told me this story, I've decided my mom is simply immune to fear. Hilariously, there was a hidden room in the house, but it wasn't in the cellar. It was on the third floor, behind the wall next to my cot. Kinda short, but still eerie. My dad always said he never wanted a funeral. He always told me, my mom, and whoever else listened, that he just wanted to be cremated but no funeral, memorial, or service at all. He always claimed the typical, if they didn't care to see me alive, then I don't care to see them when I'm dead. Well, he ended up passing away, and months later, when we finally got him back from the crematorium, we were going to do a small memorial service. Nothing fancy. We rented out a gazebo or barn area at a local park, and we're going to bring some sandwiches and sodas for anyone who decided to show. Well, about a week later, my mom gets a call asking if she'd like her refund in the form of a check or debit back to the card she used to place the reservation. We both were confused and asked why we would want a refund. Well, they stated, they were unsure of the exact reason, but had said that the gazebo or party area in the local park had burned down. This was a local 200 to 300-year-old barn that was on the land where the owners had decided to donate the area to the National Park Service back in the 70s. So the timing was unreal to me. I still think Dad was mad at us that we tried to do something without his permission. Back in the mid-90s, my family lived in a house that was old as hell. Like, parts of it were still running on knob and tube wiring old. All kinds of strange stuff happened in that house, and it started on day one of us moving in. We were all in the master bedroom getting stuff situated. We had 6 large slats for the king-size bed. We made sure there were 6. One of these boards disappeared while we were putting the bed together, and it never showed back up. Things would randomly disappear the entire 4 years we lived there. Animals would constantly die. We couldn't keep anything alive in that house longer than 6 months. In the 4 years we were there, I buried 24 animals. Every night from midnight until 3 a.m., we'd hear someone climb the front step, cross the porch, and knock on the door. The neighbors never saw anyone on the porch, but they'd hear the knocking as well. If we sat outside, we wouldn't hear the noise. It wasn't the neighbors. They were wheelchair-bound, and our porch was by no means accessible to them. The weirdest thing happened one night. Not long before we moved, my mom and I were woken up by what sounded like everything made of glass in the house shattering at once. We searched the entire house and didn't find so much as a cracked picture frame. The next day, my neighbors asked what happened that night, and when we asked why, they told us our house had a weird greenish light around it. When we asked about what time, it was the same time that we heard the noise. I miss that house.